Hi, my name is Arlen Peebles with the Illinois Principals Association, and today we're sitting down with Diana Zaleski from IEA to talk about her new ELN course, Understanding SB100 and Student Discipline. Thanks for joining us, Diana.
Thanks for having me.
So first question I just wanted to get out there, could you briefly describe for us and unpack a little bit of SB100? What is the most important points of SB100 for educators to know?
So the two most important points of Senate Bill 100 are that we no longer have zero tolerance policies. So we cannot require administrators to suspend or expel students for particular acts of misconduct. In addition, the law is requesting that districts work to reduce the number of out-of-school suspensions and expulsions and analyze annually their student discipline data to make sure that we don't have any disproportionate disciplinary practices in our schools.
Okay. And so why is exclusionary practices so harmful for students?
So there's a number of things that research shows occur when students are suspended or expelled out of school. So of course, it reduces their academic engagement. So when we suspend or expel a student out of school, we're telling them that we no longer want them as part of our educational community. So of course, that would affect their engagement and their motivation in school. So that also results in lower academic achievement. It results in the students possibly engaging in other types of harmful activities out of school. It engages in lower rates of graduation and higher rates of student dropout.
And so what are some other disciplinary measures that can be taken that are more positive than exclusionary? So
there's a lot of things that we can do to keep students in school because we want to address the root causes of that the disciplinary issues rather than just removing that student from school, because usually that exacerbates the problem rather than solving it. So if we use things like appropriate in-school suspension that's staffed by a licensed teacher, that's really important. So we can provide academic support. We can also provide social-emotional learning support in in-school suspension. And then we can also provide any other interventions that are appropriate that student would normally be receiving while they're in school, so we can keep them on track and make sure that they graduate on time. Also practices like restorative justice, restorative practices are very effective because what we're doing with restorative practices is we're teaching students a problem-solving methodology so they can solve their own conflict. Because, thinking about an adolescent, right, conflict is occurring almost every minute of every day for that student. And so when we teach them about restorative practices and the framework of restorative practices, and we engage them in that continuum of practices, then they start to internalize those practices and can use them independently without teachers having to intervene.
Nice. And why are these restorative practices so powerful? Why do they work so well with students?
So the restorative practices are really a framework for additional interventions like social-emotional learning. So we're asking students to problem solve. And so we're also teaching them a problem-solving method. So asking them questions about, what happened? What were you thinking of at the time? How has your behavior impacted others? So we're really building empathy and accountability for their actions, getting them to think about how their actions have impacted others. And then we ask them, how do we make things right? So they can problem solve about, what do I need as a victim or what do I need as an offender of a conflict to resolve that, to move on with our day, to make sure that we can then integrate back into our school community and this won't bubble up again as an issue later on.
And what do restorative practices look like? How are they coordinated within the school setting?
Yeah, so there's a continuum of practices from very informal proactive practices to formal proactive practices. Implementing the entire continuum is really important because all of those practices build upon each other. So the informal practices include affective statements. The purpose of affective statements are to help students think about how their behavior has impacted the teacher, impacted others around them, building that empathy. Because empathy is a learned skill. We're not born with empathy. That has to be modeled and taught for us. And then we move on to affective questions. So those are the questions like, what happened? What were you thinking about at the time? What have you thought about since? How have your actions impacted others? What can we do to make things right? So we're starting to teach them then a framework for how do you resolve conflict? When conflict occurs, what process do you need to think through? How do you talk about your feelings in a positive, pro-social way? And how do you resolve conflict so you can rebuild your relationships, repair harm, and move on in the educational community? then the most formal practice is restorative conferencing. So perhaps we have some more serious incidences of misconduct, for example, school vandalism, harassment, bullying, or just repeated misconduct that hasn't been extinguished using any other intervention or any of the other restorative practices, then we're going to move to restorative conferencing. So this is really an instance if a student is about to be suspended, we want to think about restorative conferencing as an option. It could replace an in-school suspension. It could replace an out-of-school suspension. Mm-hmm. It could reduce the number of days of an out-of-school suspension. It could occur along with an in-school suspension. So there's lots of different options, but that's requiring parents, other administrators, staff to come to the table to really problem solve about what's going on, how can we resolve the situation, and then reincorporate in a positive way back into the school community. And if a student has been suspended out of school, or they've been expelled, or that they've been placed in an alternative school setting, or they've been incarcerated, we can also use the framework of a restorative conference to welcome that student back to school in a really positive way. So we're no longer talking about the incident that's been resolved. We're talking about what does the student need to be successful? So again, we have all of the school administration, teachers, other staff that need to be part of that conversation. Let's make a plan. Let's make sure the student feels welcome, that they're wanted back at school, and that we're going to ensure that they're successful.
And we've got a 3-part course on EdLeaders Network on restorative practices that goes deep into each of those different types of circles.
That's great.
That's an additional resource. Do you have any additional resources on your IEA website that might be good for folks to check out in regards to SB100 student discipline?
Yes. So we have a specific Senate Bill 100 and student discipline site that has a variety of resources that talk through the facts around Senate Bill 100, that has handouts for administrators, teachers to use on that topic to have the conversation about Senate Bill 100. Also related to that is our adverse childhood experiences training and other information on that topic. We also have additional interventions and information about interventions on that topic on our Senate Bill 100 and student discipline site. And in addition, IEA provides no-cost training to our IEA-affiliated schools on lots of different interventions like restorative practices, adverse childhood experiences, and also a new training we're going to be providing on pro-social skills training, which is a targeted 10-week intervention for students who are really struggling with their social skills, regulating their emotions, and moral reasoning.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to share that with us, Diana.
Well, thank you for having me.
And if you're interested in accessing Diana's full course on understanding SB100 and student discipline, you can check it out in the description below. Thank you. Take care.